Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. I will go ahead and get started with my presentation. My name is Ingo Barth. I am German and here in the United States for a visiting program. I am part of a signing family, multi-generational signing family who uses DGS and have grown up using sign language. At the university level, I studied physics and received my diploma, which is a bachelor's level degree, and then continued on to a doctoral program in experimental psychology, in theoretical chemistry. My work is focused in theoretical chemistry, and I have been working at the Max Planck Institute for Microstructure Physics in Halle, which is a small town in Germany. I've worked there in the context of a research organization and have been doing my research during this time, looking at very small systems, physical systems in terms of atoms and molecules. I've been there for the past 7 years, but I have recently ended my contract with that organization. This is the research group that I've worked with since 2017. They are all hearing individuals. And it was at this time that we had the idea for the Sign2MINT project that I'll be talking about today. We've communicated through an interpreter who has been on site with us to facilitate our research team exchanges, but we determined that additional communication would be helpful. I've listed here some of my research focuses. And if you have any interest in collaborating or discussing the research in particular, I would be happy for you to reach out. And I'll add that in recent times, I've added additional research interests to this list, specifically the program that I'm going to start to talk about today in terms of adding to my focus from physics into other STEM fields. Really what began this research program was the idea that we needed to come up with signs for terms in the STEM fields rather than relying solely on fingerspelling. And in order to do that, we would need deaf people who were themselves involved in STEM initiatives and of course some funding to get a project off the ground. So in 2015, I began reaching out to colleagues, deaf colleagues, and from there we established the program that I'll be talking about today. The acronym STEM is an English word for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. In German, because we have different names for those terms, the acronym we use is MINT, M-I-N-T. So that's mathematics, computer technology, N is for the natural sciences, and then T is for other technologies. German Sign Language, which is abbreviated DGS, is the sign language that we've focused on in this project, the Sign2MINT project, looking at signs for these science concepts. So as I mentioned, I reached out to colleagues who work in the fields, in the STEM fields, and have created a series of workshops over time that would bring everyone together. And year after year, as we've had more and more workshops, the number of participants has grown very nicely. Those workshops have allowed us time to collaborate, to learn from each other in terms of the fields that we're all working in, and to hear from experts in the field in terms of presentations, but also to divide into working groups that may be more domain specific, so that we can talk about problematic signs or concepts for which we need more understanding linguistically, and how we work with interpreters in those contexts. That also requires us to navigate the university system as professionals as well. So we've had those discussions too. We've talked about the barriers that we've encountered with working with interpreters, with requesting interpreters, and having qualified interpreters, and come up with some signs for STEM concepts that we can agree on and use somewhat universally, so that we have access, especially in interpreted settings. So this project's name is Sign2MINT, the number 2 in the middle. And I'll describe the process that we've gone through. You see here on this slide pictures of the first 4 convenings of the MINT workshops. These were wonderful times where we convened deaf scholars in the STEM fields from all around Germany to come together and discuss how it is that we use language to talk about STEM concepts. We did invite a couple of non-German deaf colleagues, as well as some interpreters as well, for some of the workshops. Other workshops did not actually have interpreters present. And by the time we had our 5th iteration, as you can see in the photo here, we grew in size quite a lot, where we had many more deaf scientists, but also deaf teachers of science who got involved. So this 5th workshop was in 2018. And then we had a 6th workshop in 2019, which is pictured here. Again, as you can see, we've grown in size over time, where here in 2019, we had approximately 100 participants from all across the country. Most of these participants were professionals who were in the fields of STEM and had a need for signs to be able to work with interpreters in interpreted interactions, but also saw the need to make sure that when we explain scientific concepts to children in the school setting, that we have signs readily available. And that there is an equivalence between the language of instruction and the written language that's prevalent in the field of science, which would be English. And so we've had a lot of these discussions about ensuring that there is equivalence between written language and signing language. And it has grown to be somewhat international in scope. Of course, because of the COVID pandemic, we haven't had more in-person workshops.
We have had a couple of STEM conferences that have included not just Germany, but all of Europe. We met in Prague, and you can see a couple of the photographs here. We also met in the Netherlands for our 2nd conference. In Europe, we've been able to have conversations, especially Western Europe, the Netherlands, and other countries have been able to come together, those from France, Ireland, and talk about STEM signs that are used and be able to leverage signed concepts that have been created in other countries. I'm hoping in the future we'll be able to include more folks and learn more about what others are using to really understand globally where we are. So I'm wondering about the audience here and where all of you are from. Of course, at Gallaudet, we've had these discussions as well. In 2012, there was a conference here in the US to focus specifically on STEM. There's also the Deaf Academics Conference, DAC, that occurred in Denmark most recently. And it was a smaller group of folks, but there was a German contingent there, and there was a group that was able to talk about STEM. The more recent conferences have been on Zoom, and moving forward, we will see what those conferences look like and how creative we can be in terms of future projects and opportunities. And the opportunities for international collaborations. The more networking that we can do, the more connected we are to each other, the better, the more our projects can grow. So Sign2MINT is a project that we created specifically focusing on a STEM dictionary in German Sign Language. We were able to get a grant to fund this project. We listed our aims and consequently were able to receive funding. Our goals for this project were to break down communication barriers, facilitate educational access to STEM subjects, enable better participation in research and science for deaf and hard of hearing people, for students and teachers to have access to STEM lexicon, to allow for deaf researchers to more effectively communicate with each other in sign languages. And finally, for interpreters to expand their own interpreting skills and be able to interpret in STEM settings more effectively. This was a 3-year-long project, began in 2019 and is continuing now through 2022. We will complete it in a couple of months. I am the project lead. The financial support came from the Max Planck Foundation. Again, this 3-year grant had the goal of having 5,000 STEM signs documented and available on our website. We've collaborated with Workplace Solutions on the technical side to support us with web development and keeping our website effective and operational. We needed their support for that. I, of course, could not do this work alone. I have a very strong team that has worked together. After we received this funding, as the lead, I was responsible for how we use the funds. I immediately brought in a project coordinator who was able to coordinate and reach out to others and facilitate the meetings and discussions that we had. That was Robert Jasko. You can see his name here. He's done a lot of work as our coordinator. We also needed a media designer to help us with video. We've needed folks to help us, of course, on the linguistic side, to make sure that we had the opinions and feedback of linguists about the signs that we were creating, and to help us make sure we created signs that made sense with DGS. We needed other folks as well who we did connect with who had expertise in various areas, including chemistry, physics, and math. So we were able to invite in these experts and have 3 separate workshops focusing on 3 different subject areas. Each meeting had approximately 5 participants, 5 experts that could support us in this. And I'll talk more about that as the presentation goes on. And then, of course, Workplace Solutions helped us with the technical aspects of the website. So we would film the videos, submit them to them, and they would have them prepared for us on the website. Robert was not the sole project coordinator. He had a team of project staff as well to support him with the process. As I mentioned, we had 3 separate workshops, so 3 separate working groups, one focusing on mathematics, another on physics and chemistry, and a third on biology. You can see some images here of the opportunities we had to come together and discuss and collaborate. Our goal was to meet monthly. And then, of course, with the pandemic, that made things more challenging, and we did go on to Zoom. But as the COVID numbers have gone down, we have been able to meet in person at times. It's been very challenging to go back and forth between the 2 mediums, though. My former work at the Max Planck Institute actually had a studio, professional studio that you can see here with a green screen that allowed us to create professional quality videos of these signs that we were able to then post on our website. I want to explain a little bit about our workflow and how Sign2MINT has come to be. We began with those workshops, but before that, we had to decide the topics that we wanted to have discussed in those workshops. We thought about looking at terms alphabetically, but we instead decided that we should do theme-based discussions, or we could leverage people's knowledge, make sure that we had people come in who understood a specific topic, have someone coordinate bringing in those experts and then discussing these specific topics in the work groups together. Within a given work group, we had conversations about specific signs that had already been created for certain concepts and talked about other concepts that did not have a specific sign or set of signs to describe them. We focused on signs that made sense for vocabulary that we did have, and we didn't spend too much time on any one concept. It was also important for us to document the vocabulary that we already did have in DGS that certain experts and folks had, and get that documented in both written form and on video. Of course, documenting information that's in a sign language through written language is not effective. It's important to make sure that there's a video documentation as well that goes along with that. We would generally have these workshops and then afterward film videos, edit them, make sure that they were done professionally and everything was signed clearly and effectively so that others could leverage this resource. Next, I'm going to show you the process that we used, how we're able to document this data, how we made decisions about who would sign which terms, and thinking about the subject areas that we used. We had to organize our approach and make sure that we used an effective approach. We used a spreadsheet of sorts to make sure that we had all of our information documented effectively, that we could create videos, and that the process allowed for a smooth transition to WPS and ultimately getting these signs on the website. Once we had everything on paper, we had our groups meet again to review and make sure we agreed with what was there before we finally transferred the videos to the website. Then once we had all of our data and it was shared on the website, we were able to make that public. And we did this topic by topic. It was an iterative process of sorts, but we started with, say, roughly 100 to 150 signs through a 2-day workshop, and then had subsequent workshops where we discussed a new set of signs. This is what our website looks like. This is in German. There is not an English translation. Guessing you could understand much of this. So this shows the different fields that we've discussed: mathematics, biology, physics, and others are added here as there have been workshops about them. You can use the search bar to search for a specific word and see if there is a sign equivalent. If there isn't one, you can email us and ask about that vocabulary word. We are keeping a list to discuss with experts in future work groups. there is vocabulary word that is found, you'll see it pop up like this. You can see what the video looks like. There may be 2 or 3 different signed options for a single concept. You may see that here where there's one German word can be translated into 3 or 4 different DGS signs. So there may be different sign variations. This can be true in every area. We also have a definition written in German of the term. So in this example, we have 3 different sign variations for orbital. I'm signing those now. The second option. The third. Again, there is that search option. You can also try to search by sign, effectively the reverse process, where you enter in a sign by choosing the hand shape first to search for a specific German word. So you can start with the hand shape. You can also change the palm orientation, explain the location, movement, if there's contact. And then you can find a list of English words or German words that are the equivalent of those. So for example, using the X hand shape in the ASL X hand shape or the bent index finger, then you can find, for example, several signs that use that bent index finger and that production or that hand shape. So here's one example of that sign. Sign for frequency. The more parameters that you are able to select, the more specific you can get in terms of the words that you are looking for. There are some concepts like this in other countries around the world, but the importance of being able to search both directions is important, not just from the written language to the sign language, but from the sign language to the written language. It's very important to be able to search both ways, and hopefully in the future that we'll see more and more of that and it will be more possible. We use a German sign writing system here that's not very well known, but is effective for us. As I mentioned, there were 3 working groups focusing on different subject areas, one on math, one on physics and chemistry, and the third on biology. And there were also times when everyone came together to talk about these concepts. We met as a larger group as well, not just in the subgroups, but to allow everyone to interact and have discussions around these signs. This was a topic that applied to everyone when we're talking about alpha to omega, the Greek alphabet. We began this conversation roughly 7 years ago, going through all of the letters, and this was before the Sign2MINT project, but in a previous, more informal opportunity of deaf academics, people in the field of STEM, there have been these discussions around the best translations here, and this is one example of something that we did. So we could borrow the fingerspelling used from Greek sign language, but it's difficult to see lower and uppercase letters. They're represented the same way in sign language, but of course, it's important to recognize the difference. And we were thinking about the way to best represent that in German Sign Language or other sign languages to be able to represent the upper and lower case letters, as they do have a different meaning. So for the uppercase letters, we followed the Greek alphabet. For the lowercase letters, we decided we could move the hand lower to represent that. And you can see the letters here in green. That's where we would use the DGS or ASL letter, as the case may be, for example, with Omicron, Rho, Kappa, Mu. But for the ones in orange that you see, we had a conversation about what signs should be used to represent them.
So now I'm going to play a 2-minute video of these signs. There is obviously some German influence that you may be able to tell. This is not something that we expect would be universal, or something that you could adopt immediately into ASL, but it should give you an idea of how you might embark on such a project if you were interested in doing that in the United States, or if we could have a conversation about this being useful in international contexts. So you'll see the letter at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen that is meant to be signed. And I'll point out that there is some variation here as well, as you can see. So you've perhaps seen that there is some variation in some of the letters. And the team felt that we needed all of these variants because of the way they're used in the different STEM fields. And it was difficult to come to a consensus from one field to another, for example, physics to biology. You also see that the capital letters tend to be more static, whereas the lowercase letters tend to have more movement to them. You saw that in epsilon in the capital and lowercase versions. And as we mentioned before, we did have some linguists who were part of the team. I also mentioned that we borrowed some of the fingerspelling signs from the Greek sign language alphabet, but then made some modifications to ensure that it was respectful of DGS usage. For example, the letter T or tau in this case, modifying that to the way that that hand shape is used in Germany. And ASL and DGS have a very similar system of fingerspelling, the tau being one difference in particular. So it was at this later workshop where we worked through the full periodic table of the elements and had a discussion about the signs that we could use for those. This was a really fruitful conversation because we recognized that there were no signs to represent the elements. And we started with a bit of play in the group to see if people could, on the fly, come up with some signs for these elements. So we assigned them at random a card that had an element on it with some of its characteristics, maybe color, appearance, and they would try to describe that element, and the rest of the group would have to guess what it was. And this set the stage for us to be creative about the ways in which we could come up with signs that described elements so that they were useful to learners, especially, or other people in the community. I've taken this periodic table because it has some pictures of the elements and their common usages here. This is all 118. If you look at the bottom row, you'll see that there are elements named after people, things that we are not very common. So we've looked at the places or the people who they are named for to try to get some information about the background of those elements. If you see anything that's not accurate, let me know, but this is based on the research that we were able to do in 2018. Keep in mind that there are some differences in spelling or the names of the elements between English and German. And so if you look at the signs for the elements that we've come up with, you may notice some differences contextually. And of course, the mouthing movements are going to be different as well. Oxygen is one in particular that looks very different on the mouth between English and German. We, of course, have done this work for a German audience, so we've tailored the work to German signers. But we want, we would be open to feedback about how this might be used in other contexts. There are, of course, other elements that are common, that have common names between German and English, like helium. And so this presents an opportunity for collaboration internationally with users of other sign languages. I'm not going to play this entire video because it is rather long. It goes through the elements and the signs that we've come up with. So I'll probably play the first 20 or 30 elements. If you're interested in the entire list, you can, of course, look at this later. We have the atomic number and the symbol, along with the German word, the English word, and as I mentioned, the symbol there at the bottom. So perhaps at the next Zoom meeting that we have, we can talk about these signs more. But I wanted to give you an overview of how they were created and what they look like. So at the workshop that I mentioned, we went through the Greek letters and also the elements. And thirdly, we worked on illustrations of signs. so that we could put them in a static form, but also in an animated form. And that those could be dually useful in certain contexts. And this would be especially important for people who are learning these signs across the board. So here's an example. Of course, the words that you see here are in German, but hopefully you can get a sense of what they mean. That's the sign for diode. The artist that we worked with on this project was really talented. What do you think that means? Yeah. This is one for biologists. Hopefully you're getting a sense of the meaning of these signs, even if you don't know them explicitly. Convergence and divergence. Solution. This is our sign for nature. So we use 2 fingers for DNA and 1 finger for RNA. Spectrum, I use this one often. This is one for math. Math folks in the room. Octopus. Triglyceride with the 3 arms on it. Trigonometry. Showing the 3 dimensions. All right, so that was a series of illustrations that I think gives you a sense of some of the work product that we did over the course of the 3-year project that we're still embarking on, and the ways in which we've disseminated some of those findings. On February 23rd, we'll have a roundtable discussion similar to the one that I mentioned that happened before. So that will be coming up next week. I hope if you're interested in this type of work, you'll join us there. And we'll have more of these types of meetings in the future. And maybe this is a topic that we can explore at an international gathering, the topic of lexicography in the STEM fields. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'm happy to take any questions or entertain comments if you have any.
If you have any questions, please come to the front of the room to ask your question. Oh, sorry about that. If you have any questions and you're in the room, please come to ask a question here. If you are on Zoom and would like to ask a question, please type it in the chat on Zoom, okay? Does anyone in the room have any questions they'd like to ask? Anybody have any questions? Okay.
This was a really wonderful presentation. I appreciate it. I saw that you had some video examples that you showed, and I'm wondering if those are available online, if you have these available that we could watch them later. Specifically the video. Is it all right if I take my mask off? All right, hopefully this will be better. I'll repeat my question. Your presentation was lovely. Thank you very much for that. You showed 3 videos, one with the Greek letters, the elements, and then the drawings. Are those videos in particular available somewhere that we can access them, like a website that we could access them later?
To repeat what I understand of the question, we did 3 different projects, one with the Greek alphabet, one with the periodic table, and a third.
The drawings.
Okay, I'm actually going to hold off on that discussion for the moment. So in terms of the website, we don't have that on the website yet. We may in the future. We've been using Instagram and Facebook, and know that anything we have on our website is free. And so you can subscribe to our page as well to get updates. There's, again, the separate subject areas: chemistry, math, science, physics. And with chemistry, you can specifically click on that to see the list of the periodic elements. The individual signs from both of those projects are available. The third option where you talked about the drawings has been created for marketing purposes. But the periodic table is available online. We've recently been able to send that in. Been working on editing all of that together. And so we do have the videos. They have been agreed upon and are available, should be available on our website soon. For the alphabet, we have that in its entirety. Did you have another question?
Yes, if I may. So regarding your websites, I saw an example of a sign for orbital where you had some variation. And then below that, you had a definition that was offered. Do you have any information about the variants themselves as to why those variants exist? Maybe they're geographical, or when to use one versus the other?
It can also depend on the field. It could be biology, physics, or both. So a single German word could be translated differently depending on the field, but also the location, the geography. And we do have that noted. It may be that the entire country uses effectively the same sign, but it may be that there are variations based on geography, and we have noted that when that's been the case. And if it's been differentiated by the field that's been discussed, and of course, we always have linguistic input on the signs that we're sharing as well, making sure they're linguistically accurate. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Hello, and thank you for your talk. Let me make sure I'm centered correctly. My name is Julie Huxang, a German last name, and I work in the linguistics department here at the university. I have a very similar interest as you do, which is lexicography in ASL, but also looking across the language spectrum to see how language is used. I have a particular interest in standardized language and how it is that communities pick signs to use, including in interpreted interactions, and the ways in which some signs may have variants that carry more or less power to them, if you will. What are your thoughts about the power that people wield in coming up with new signs? Often we see that the ones who create new signs are the ones with money and privilege and advanced degrees, but how is it that we recognize the contributions of those who aren't in those situations? Now, I understand that your goal is to include the academics in the discussion, but is there a way that we can be more equitable to the community and inclusive of different perspectives?
That's a great question. So as I mentioned, the smaller workshops that we had included only about 4 or 5 people, and that meant being exclusive. We had all deaf people who all were native signers and who had expertise in the specific subject area that we were discussing. We found that to be important for the type of discussion we were having. We also brought in linguists from time to time to offer their perspective on whether or not the signs made sense in our language, not to argue, but to discuss and to elevate the conversation. Of course, there are variations of some signs, and there are times where you can't decide that one sign is the quote unquote better sign. All of the signs should have equal clout, but we maximized that at about 3 or 4 variations. We didn't want to have 20 plus variations on a sign. In German, the way that words work is often the words are longer and include several different pieces to them that change the meaning. There could be 2 or 3 equivalent variations even for each part of the word. So if we're thinking about the translation into DGS, we could have one German word with a couple of variations that could end up in 9 DGS signs. So we had to make decisions based on what is more often used. We also chose different signs from different parts or regions of the country to make sure we were equitable in that sense. And we tried to honor the meaning of the word and the translation the best that we could when we were doing so. We also would ask the community and get community feedback. But of course, it takes time for people to see a sign and then see whether or not it's adopted by the community. We can have these discussions in academia, but we have to make sure that it's not prescriptive and that we have these conversations with the community. We can create the signs, but they have to be adopted by people both within and outside of our country for them to continue to be used. Again, we didn't spend too much time on any one sign. There was a sign where there was a lot of disagreement. We might ask linguists for their opinion. And we again relied on our 5 experts in a given field before we shared them with the community. For the most part, we've received very positive feedback. Sometimes the community has sent us other variations, and we've gone back to have further discussion based on that community feedback.
I'm still not used to this room setup. Sorry. Let me find my angle. So a question from the chat that I'll pose to you. It says, thank you very much for your work. The person's name is Gabriel Arellano, who works in STEM education with deaf children. It was more of a comment than a question, but he would like to know if you'd be interested in collaborating with his project in particular. And so hopefully we can connect you to. Another question, well, more again, a comment was just that your topic was quite wonderful and interesting. Any other questions from the room here while we have time? Okay, seeing as though our time has run short, I will close us out. We do have a recording of today's proceedings that we will share on Facebook if you're interested in watching it later. There's a question from the audience, which is whether you've been working across Europe and not just in Germany.
So this project is based in Germany and focused on DGS, but I believe you saw there were 2 international conferences that we were a part of. And there is some work being done that's come out of those conferences. There's also the Deaf Academics Conference that happened in person 2017 or 18, where there was a discussion as well. That was incredibly powerful, very rich discussion. And there have been other projects coming out of that. There is not one centralized European system. There were these 2 conferences that were hosted, of course, since COVID. With the pandemic, there have been less opportunities for people to meet. There is the desire there, but we haven't had a lot of progress since the pandemic began.
All right, I will close by saying thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Barth, for your comments that have really inspired some thinking in myself, and I hope some that we'll be able to talk more about over lunch. Those of you who are on campus, please stop by HMB on the 3rd floor to say hello to Dr. Barth, who will be with us for some time. And thank you everyone, of course, for your patience with getting through a hybrid session, which was our first time doing that. Take care.